Hey, it's your guy Tyrrell back with the interviews. Mauricio Pochettino Spurs haven't lived up to the expectations that many have set for them. Where are the trophies? Can they get it this season? And what system will help them deliver their best chance of doing that? Don't worry, here at the interviews, we've got you covered. So on this edition of the interviews, we're going to break down if Spurs is better in a three-man backline or a midfield diamond. So when we think about Spurs, we think about what they've done this summer. They haven't made any big summer signings. And with that being said, a lot of people have questioned whether they'd be able to finish in the top four. We look at their season thus far. They've started it well, lost their final game to Watford, who is unbeaten ahead of the international break. But Spurs are looking like a side, given the fact that Chelsea just got Mauricio Sarri, given the fact that United have stumbled a bit early, could finish in the top four. However, what system will they play in? And today's video, we're going to break down the two systems that Spurs have played in and kind of give you the strengths and weaknesses to it, more so the strengths, because Spurs haven't been that bad this season. So when we think about it, this video, we're going to discuss the 4-4-2 diamond and we're going to discuss the 3-5-2. But first, let's break down the Spurs lineup. Typically, so far this season, we've seen them in that 4-4-2 diamond. Harry Kane up front, Lucas Moura beside him. In the hole, we have Christian Eriksen, wants to get the ball between the lines, but often drops deeper. Out in the shuttling role, we've seen Moussa Sissoko, but so far, we've mostly seen Eric Dyer and Dele Alli playing that role. Also, with Dembele sitting as the holder or Dyer sitting as a holder. Out in the wing-back areas or the full-back areas, on the left side, they've been going with Ben Davies. They do have Danny Rose as well. Out on the right side, Kieran Trippier, and they could go with Serge Aurier. At the back, you have the combination of either three options where you could go with Vertonghen, Alderweireld, or you could go with Davinson Sanchez. Spurs look like a very good side. They have the keys to finish in the top four, but can they go one better? Do they have what it takes to challenge for, if not the Premier League title, a trophy, or making a deep run in the Champions League? The first four games does provide a sign of optimism, but first let's break down how they look in a midfield diamond. So let's get to the midfield diamond. We've seen Spurs utilize this system in two games this season, the opening game against Newcastle and then when they went to face Manchester United. When we look at the game against Newcastle, it was the opening game. Players didn't look fully fit. It was an early morning kickoff, so we do have to put that into perspective. Newcastle was very sloppy. They did drop off into two banks of four. But we look about Spurs, we have to look at the roles that they do play. When you play a midfield diamond, what you're trying to do is basically dominate the central area and ensure that you pull out the opponents into narrow positions so that you can push the ball out into wide areas. The midfield diamond is always criticized for not having enough width, but when you look at how Spurs are lined up, they have attacking players in those wide areas who offer that creativity in those wider areas. You think about it, you have Kane, you have Lucas Moura. Kane doesn't need to be around the box. He's an all-rounder. He could drop deep, he could spit into the channels, and then you want Lucas Moura to do the same thing, and he has that burst of pace that could be key. The thing here with Spurs is that when they have played Kane in a central partnership up front, if it wasn't Lucas Moura, you would see him there with Heung-min Son, who kind of offers the same threat. Could spin in behind, could break in behind. That's what they want, a proper strike partnership. Kane drops deep, runner breaks behind her into the channels. Kane could do it all. He's a great all-rounder, so that's pivotal. We look at the midfield zone. You have the shuttlers. In that opening game, they went with Dele Alli, they went with Sissoko. Sissoko's driving and his ability to carry the ball forward is key. Dele Alli, what he likes to do, especially in these when he faces these two banks of four, is he likes to pick up the ball in the space between the lines here, and he offers a third man breaking into the box, looking to peel off the right back. In that case, it was DeAndre Yedlin. You think about Eriksen, obviously he wants the ball between the lines, but with Dyer sitting deeper, and with that space compressed, you often see him dropping deeper, and what he does offer is that threat in behind. He could play those balls over the top, and he could try to play in Harry Kane or Lucas Moura. With that being said, if they have all these players in there and Dyer setting the tempo from deep, what happens is that Spurs or Newcastle have to be narrow, and that creates avenues for Davies and for Trippier to push forward, and the center backs could obviously push forward, and they have the ability to play passes as well. You think about Spurs, that is how they won at Newcastle. Obviously, the first goal came from a set piece, but the second goal kind of summed things up. It was Eriksen picking up the ball between the lines, then playing it into Aurier, and Aurier's first time ball. What we see is Dele Alli peel off Yedlin, and he's able to nod his effort into the net. The thing with Spurs here is that if Moura pushes off into the channels, what they can get is Kane and Ali as aerial threats in the box. And if they do have Kane dropping a deeper, which he has done this season, obviously you could have Ali in there as well. That game, not too many chances really being created. Newcastle created a lot of their chances from just poor positioning from Spurs or just loose balls falling to them and then taking effort. But when you look at it as a whole, Spurs were really in control of that game. And like I said, obviously you have the runner in behind, and that's how Ali got about it. But when they played United, it was a bit of something different. United changed their system, and because they knew that Spurs were going to play with 2 men up top, they wanted to ensure that they had markers in the back. So they moved to more of a 3-5-2. And what happens there is that it kind of neutralizes what Spurs want to do. Kane and Lucas Moura now are outnumbered 3v2. The wingbacks in Luke Shaw and you have Antonio Valencia. Will stick with Dave. On that day, it was Danny Rose and Kieran Trippier. In midfield, Matic, Pogba, and you have Fred in midfield, and that negates the midfield diamond, because what happens now, you have Matic against Eriksen, then you have Fred against Dyer, and you have Ali against Pogba, and then in the back, you have Dembele who's sitting deeper, and he's supposed to deal with either Lingard dropping off and Lukaku's up front with the center back. So when you look at it as a whole, that is how United are going about it. And realistically, when you think about it, Pogba's job was to stop Ali from breaking forward and behind. Fred had the running on Dyer and often pulled into greater positions. And then when you look at it as a whole, Dembele never really pressed by Lingard, but he was there for a reason, and we'll get to that in a second. And then Eriksen was tasked with the ability to deal with Nemanja Matic. We've seen when they go 1v1 in the past that Matic has been unable to deal with the threat of him. And the first half, United did create chances. They were playing on the counterattack. Spurs were very poor, misplacing passes, not really getting the job done. How United were getting about them were they were having Shaw go at Trippier, and Luke Shaw did have a very good half. He was fine going 1v1 against Kieran Trippier. And then the other aspect was the fact that Spurs weren't playing as direct as you'd want them to be. You had Moura who was able to drop off and run at defenders like Phil Jones and Chris Smalling, and that was helpful. But Spurs never really kicked off into the second half when United started to lose control of the game, when they started to open space out. And when you look at the goals that they've scored, it just goes to show what this Spurs side could do, because when you look at it, what happens is that it's on two occasions. You have Shaw stepping to Trippier, but Trippier can clip the ball into that space. Nemanja Matic has no idea where Eriksen is, and we've seen this from Eriksen throughout. If he's not running into the half spaces, he's moving out into the right channel. And we saw on the build-up to both goals, first time he runs into the box, he runs into that right half space, picks up the ball, he pulls it back to Ali. But what happens is that when Ali's running, Pogba follows him, and Ali earns a corner kick that leads to Kane scoring the opener. Then we look at the second goal. Again, the same run into that space off Matic. Moura's able to, he dropped deep, was able to run into the box. The ball is pulled back for Lucas. He fires a shot past De Gea. Within seconds, United are ahead. But the signs were on the wall throughout at the end of the first half and the second half. And with Spurs dropping off after into two banks of four, United had no idea how to break them down. But when you look at the diamond, what it does do, even though Spurs were clogged out in those wider areas and Danny Rose had an awful game, you think about it, they found ways to go about it with the fact that they could use the channels, they could run at defenders, and they have the ability for Eriksen to dart in or drop off, and his ability to find his markers in the box has been key. But there was about getting beyond Matic, and United did present a different proposition for them, but Spurs were able to pass that test, although not playing extremely well with flying colors. Now we move to the three-man backline. Spurs playing in a 3-5-2. We've seen this last season. They've played this against two opponents, Fulham and Watford, two sides that have impressed this season. When we look at how they went against Fulham, Fulham obviously most likely playing a 4-3-3. When you are in a 4-3-3, you drop into more of a 4-5-1 without the ball. They had wide players in Kamara and Sessegnon who they wanted to push back, so they had the full the wing backs higher in Davies and Trippier. And what would always happen was that as they pushed them wider, Spurs could keep narrow, because look at what they have here. Kane, they have the three men that are looking to try to get the ball forward in Eriksen and in Ali. Dyer's able to push forward, and because they have the 3v1 advantage, what would happen was that Vertonghen would be able to push forward and Alderweireld, and that would help them be able to play diagonals out into the wider areas to get these players forward. So what happened was that often they got sucked in narrow, and what would happen was that the fact was that Kieran Trippier would be free to either run at Brian, or sometimes Brian would be caught narrow and he'd be free to get the ball out in wide areas free and deliver those crosses into the box. And we often saw that in the first half. Well, again, when we look at the goal that they did score to get the game going, it is a run. It is Trippier again pushing the ball into that space for Eriksen, darting into there. Obviously, nothing comes of the cross, but what happens is that Moore is able to pick up the loose ball from the clearance and curl the effort into the net. But again, it's about congesting that midfield space. They did create a lot of chances in that first half that they probably should have scored. Lucas Moura on two occasions where Fulham's backline made a lot of mistakes, and their midfield made a lot of mistakes, and they were able to push forward. And again, like I said, just keeping it congested in there, pushing players forward so that Fulham players have to step to them, and finding that space in wide areas to deliver crosses. That is what Spurs have done very well. They did that well against Fulham, but there was a reaction to what happened as Fulham grew into the game in the second half. And what we often see here is that now with Dyer as the sole pivot, he needs help, because what was happening was that if Eriksen or if Dyer was getting pushed to the ball, sometimes Eriksen and Ali, not renowned central midfielders, they would be able to get balls in behind Dyer, play around him with 1-2s and push forward. And if they really want to push their wide players forward, because they have the midfield in Kearney, in Anguissa, and in Serdi who are able to control the ball, they were forced and pegged back into their 3-5-2, and that was a big problem. And they did suffer from it, and it did lead to Dembele coming on and the system changing, moving to more of a 4-2-3-1. But that's what led to Spurs moving more into that, pushing Dembele into that holding role and having Dyer dropped against Watford. Watford dropped off into more of a 4-4-2 without the ball, and what happened there was that they kept an eye on Dembele, because they know for as much as Dyer is immobile, Dembele is able to evade challenges and push forward. They didn't want that. Now what you have here is a 4-4-2 without the ball again. And again, it's about Ali trying to find that space in between the lines. And what we often saw was Moura being able to push into that, Lucas Moura pushing into that right side of the pitch again. Trippier wasn't really getting pressed until he stepped beyond half. They were clipping balls in there, and he was pulling out Kabasele. And what happened there was Kabasele was pushing to him, and then that led to some fouls. Moura got by him on a few occasions, but Spurs didn't really create any chances. They got an own goal that didn't really lead to much. A lot of their chances stem from Toby Alderweireld finding Ali, breaking into that space, and that was because Doucouré stepped and he was able to make that run in behind. The other opportunity stemmed from, again, just Doucouré stepping out, Dembele playing a pass to Eriksen, Eriksen playing it to Ali, then Ali playing it across to Lucas Moura, and Cathcart was able to make a last-ditch tackle. But again, Spurs were finding space in that channel, and again, Ali was trying to break forward, and we kind of have an idea how Spurs have been playing. They lost the game because they weren't able to cope with long direct balls that Watford pumped into the second half, and Troy Deeney and Gray were getting more involved into the game. They lost it that way, but when you look at it as a whole, Spurs kind of, you know how they're playing, but again, not creating enough chances. We don't really know if either of these systems are sustainable. Will Son make a difference? Will they move back to a 4-2-3-1 after the international break? From a defensive aspect, they haven't really conceded many chances either. It's just the fact of not really closing down markers. Again, we look at the set piece issues that will need to be rectified on the training ground, but even for the game against Fulham, it's a cross into the box that when you have the wider players out in a 3, you need the shuttlers to push out, and they weren't pushing out. Eriksen didn't push out, and what happens is the cross came into the box, and you saw the runner run off Davies in Sessegnon, and he pushed it back to Mitrovic. You think about the game against Newcastle, when they can see the goal, it's again down that side, the left-hand side. Trippier and Ali there, and then you have Richie and Yedlin, and again, Trippier steps to Richie not being closed down well, a superb ball through the box, and Joselu is able to nod it in. But when you look at Spurs as a whole, what system do you think is better for them? Are they better in a back three? Would you prefer them in a 4-4-2 diamond? Should they switch systems? Let me know. Meet me in the comments below. Don't forget I upload videos every day, and don't forget to subscribe to my channel. And that was your daily dose of the interviews.